Well, I have a story this morning. I'm making eggs for my 3 little kids, and Ben decided, he goes, "Daddy, can I blow out the flame on the thing?" I go, "No, son, that's not it's a gas-powered stove." And I'm like, "That's not a good idea. The house is going to fill up with gas, and we're going to blow up." And I don't think he quite understood what blown up means. You know, he's probably thinking like a balloon. I go, "We're all going to die." He puts a smile on his face, puts his hands in there like, "We're all going to die." And I'm like, and then Brianna goes with a big smile, she goes, "We're all going to heaven." I'm like, okay, you guys cannot go near the stove. That was a little scary. That was not the response of fear that I was expecting. A little excitement. It's good to know where you're going when you die. I don't want to go there right now. So I'm keeping an eye on my kids there. It's just like, bam, bam. I'm like, you guys aren't quite getting the seriousness of the situation. All right, we are continuing our book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and I only have somebody new, and just give you a quick recap where basically people that are atheists, they say, I don't have faith. I believe in science, and that's the big thing they say. But when you look at the facts, it takes more faith to believe in atheism, that there isn't a God, than it does to believe that there is a God in the Bible. We look through, and that this is the big thing now. When you take the Bible out, everything's subjective. There's no truth. We can't even agree on what's true. And that's a sad state, but we can know truth, okay? And we showed that truths are universal. They're there. And no matter how many, I love math. I teach math, and it's like there's always, how many right answers are there? Well, sometimes there's 2 if it's a, but usually there's 1 answer, right? 1 right answer, unlimited wrong answers. That doesn't mean that there's not a right answer still. 2 plus 2 is 4, no matter what they try to get you to say. And it doesn't matter if there's an unlimited number of wrong answers, there's still truth. It's universal. So we established that. We looked at 3 different arguments for God: the teleological, the moral, and the cosmological. And when we look at science really proves there's a God. Okay, you looked, the Big Bang. Well, the Big Bang's exactly what the Bible says, right? Instantaneously, but they cannot answer what? Where it all came from, okay? I have not heard any answer at all about where they even admit it's mysterious. They have no idea, but they know for sure that what? Can't be a God, can't be, and that's, amazing boldness there. But we know that the universe, they used to believe up to the 1950s, the steady state theory, that the universe was eternal, and what have they proven? It's not. So it had to have a beginning. It had to have anything that has a beginning has to have a cause, the law of causality. So something must have existed outside the universe that created the universe. Something else must have been eternal. We believe it's an all-powerful, immaterial being that created space, time, and matter. Okay, and it just blows my mind when you ask them. Well, it goes. Could you shut those doors back? Could somebody, Brother Matt, could you shut the doors back there? Those girls are a little distracting. So it goes against science, and what do they say? Oh, the laws of science didn't exist before the Big Bang. I'm like, that's really convenient. So all the matter came out of nothing, and then just decided matter can't be created after that. That it can only have, the matter in use can create itself, but then from here on in, no matter can be created. So really, when you start looking at it, it takes more faith. You have to believe in miracles no matter what. A lot of people say, I believe in science, I don't believe in miracles. You have to believe in miracles, okay? The fact that we are here, that we exist, is a miracle, breaks the laws of science. It's even more miraculous if there's no God or no cause, okay? The getting life from non-life is a miracle. We don't see that happen. We can't even create it, even with intelligence. Okay, they can't explain how it happened. Okay, so it doesn't matter. You got to believe in miracles. We believe that miracles are God's sign. When He's got a message, how do you know it's from God? He performs miracles, okay? And even non-Christians will say what? God, I saw a video of a guy driving, he's like, God, if you have lightning flash right now, I'll believe in you. And then like a second later, lightning flashes, What are they saying? If I see a miracle, I'll believe, okay? And that's how God shows us that he's real. So we narrowed it down, and there can only be one infinite God. There's only three, which excludes all other religions except Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, okay? And then we realized that how would God get his message to his people? Through written form, okay? We have the Bible. We're looking at the veracity of the Bible. There are religious people of different religions, and they want to attack the Bible. Okay, I see these debates. They go to these college campuses and they'll attack, the Bible. And so we're looking at how it was written, when it was written. I'll just finish this, just a summary of what we've been looking at here. So we have the New Testament documents are early. They're written very early after the events, contain earlier source material. We know they were probably all written before what? 70 AD, okay, because that's when the temple was just totally destroyed, and it's not talked about at all. Jesus predicted it would happen, and it happened. You think they would say something about that? So they're probably all written before 70 AD. We know Jesus died in 33 AD, okay? So, they want to say it was written so long ago after it happened. We have, they want another argument is, other sources don't talk about Jesus. And what have we shown? We've shown at least 10 ancient non-Christian writers within 150 years of his life give information about Jesus, and their collective references provide a storyline consistent with the New Testament. So yes, there are other sources. Jesus did exist. Okay, and it lines up exactly with the Bible. The New Testament contains at least 4 to 6 lines of early independent eyewitness written testimony. Okay, if you were going on trial and you had 6 witnesses, okay, that saw it, okay, then you'd have to accept it, okay? We conclude this because the major New Testament writers record the same basic events with diverging details and some unique material, okay? So the basic story is, like I said, if you had an accident out there and we all witnessed it, would we all have exactly the same story? Would we notice different things? Of course, we'd all notice. Somebody maybe noticed the color of the car, what direction, but we'd all have the same story of what? An accident happened, right? So you have a little diverging. If every detail lines up exactly, precisely the same, what does that probably tell you? They collaborated and got together, and okay, so little differences actually help. They show that they probably were the same. People just see things in a different light. Ask a man to tell a story of an event, and ask a woman to tell the same event. You get 2 completely different stories with different details and different events, and it's just how people see it. They cite at least 30 real historical figures who have been confirmed by ancient non-Christian writers in various archaeological discoveries. So they're written in there. I think one of them, for many years, they said, he didn't exist. I think it was Pilate. And then they ended up uncovering a big stone thing with his name written on there and everything. And, so they've proven that these people existed through different sources. Luke peppers the second half of Acts with at least 84 historically confirmed eyewitness details, includes several others in the Gospels. So he's talking about locations and about weather patterns and ports, and all this intricate detail about what's happened shows you he must have been there. Luke's proven trustworthiness affirms that of Matthew and Mark because they record the same basic story. John includes at least 59 historically confirmed or historically probable eyewitness details in his gospel. So it had to be written by somebody who was there or talked to somebody that was there. Paul and Peter provide the 5th and 6th written testimonies to the resurrection. Since this early independent eyewitness testimony is within 1 generation of the events, the New Testament events cannot be considered legendary. So another argument is, it was written way after it happened, and it's legendary, and they just made some stuff up, and it just like we have these historical things, Iliad and Odyssey. Some of these stuff is just made up. Okay, it's legend. but we know it was written within a generation. You can't lie to people if they're still alive when it happened, right? Okay? If people went through World War II or the Holocaust, you can't, people try, but witnesses are going to dispute what happened. As people start to pass away, then people try to change the story after it happens, but we know we have very reliable evidence in the Bible that it's true. So now look at top 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. Okay, well, and this is the argument, we can't trust any of the New Testament because they're what? They're biased. It's written by Christians. Okay, what's the biggest response to that? If somebody says that, I'm just going to discount everything written in the Bible because it's written by Christians, what would you say? Why? Why would they make up the resurrection? Okay, we look at it, what happened? They just put Jesus on the cross, okay? And what his followers had scattered, okay, which is what, and just to record that, the fact that they're recording, they're cowering in fear, I'd be doing the same thing, okay? That's one of the most brutal ways to die. Why would they steal his body? We're going to look into some of this stuff. Why would they steal the story, make up a lie, and then die for that lie? Especially after you've seen all your friends dying, and then you're starting to run out, and they're all getting killed for it. Why? They didn't get power, they didn't get money. What did they get? Persecution, torture, death. Okay, I have little kids, and they'll lie to get out of trouble. Okay, I have never had a kid lie to get into trouble. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. Why would they? And I was thinking about it. So I've heard that it's said that Islam was founded at the edge of the sword. Basically, they would conquer people, make them convert, and Christianity grew under persecution. Okay, so you're not only lying and being willing to die for something is not true, is made up, that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, but you're also telling other people to do it, to believe it, and putting their lives in danger, and they're getting persecuted and thrown to the lions and murder. I mean, that's like, it just doesn't make any sense why people would perpetuate this lie that's going to get them persecuted, attacked, they're hunting Christians down. I mean, it's just, there's no reason for that, okay? So we're looking at that. We have seen powerful evidence that the New Testament documents were written within 15 to 40 years of the death of Jesus. Add that to the confirmation from non-Christian sources and archaeology, and we know beyond reasonable doubt that the New Testament is based on historical fact. How do we know that the authors did not exaggerate or embellish what they said or what they saw? There are at least 10 reasons we can be confident that the New Testament writers didn't play fast and loose with the facts. So I love the Bible. When you read it, it's very matter of fact, and the good and the bad, and it's just very plainly, simply written, and it tells if somebody does something wrong, and even kings, it doesn't, King David, it just says he did this, and he did this, and he did good, and he did bad, and it's just very written, just the facts. But even the embarrassing stuff is in there. Number one is the New Testament writers included embarrassing details about themselves. So if you're writing a book, that's the last thing I want in the book about me, is any little embarrassing thing that I've done. So one of the ways you can tell whether an author is telling the truth is a test. It's called the principle of embarrassment. This assumes any details embarrassing to the author are probably true. Okay, I don't want them in there, and I'm not going to make up embarrassing details that I didn't do, right? That just doesn't make any sense. Why would I make up something embarrassing that, I ran in fear when I didn't, okay? If I did, I'm probably not going to include it. If I didn't, I'm not going to just make up a story that I did. The tendency of most authors is to leave out anything that makes them look bad. How does the New Testament measure up on the principle of embarrassment? Let's put it this way. If you and your friends were concocting the story that you wanted to pass off to the truth, would you make yourselves look like uncaring, rebuked, doubting cowards? Okay, nobody would do that. We'd do the opposite, right? Of course not. That's exactly what we find in the New Testament. The people who wrote down much of the New Testament are characters or friends of characters in the story, and they often depict themselves poorly. They're uncaring. We read that they fall asleep twice when Jesus asks them to pray. The New Testament writers later believe Jesus is God in the form of man, yet they admit they fell asleep on him in his hour of greatest need. Okay, that's not something I'd want in there. It's not something I would admit to. God is coming and asking me to pray, and I fall asleep. I can't do that simple thing. Moreover, they make no effort to give their friend a proper burial, but record that Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. He's a member of what? The Pharisees, the Jewish Sanhedrin. It's the very court that sentenced Jesus to die. So you think, his friends came and took care of him. They ran. They didn't do anything. The court just unfairly sentenced him to die. Joseph came and Joseph of Arimathea came and buried him. Okay, that's yours. Those are probably mad at those people. They're probably upset that what they just done, and they record they didn't bury him, but Joseph of Arimathea did. They are rebuked. Peter is called what? Satan. Okay, that's like the worst rebuke you can have by Jesus. I'd be like, hey, can we leave that out? Can we just cut that out? I really don't like that. That's really not Peter, the founder, we believe one of the closest three disciples. Peter is called Satan. Paul rebukes Peter for being wrong about a theological issue. Paul writes in Galatians 2:11, it says, "But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face because he was to be blamed." What are they saying? Hey, would you want that stuff written in there? Absolutely not. And we know Peter's one of the pillars of the early church. Here's Paul including in Scripture that he was wrong. Okay, would you want that written out there for everybody to know? Okay, you're giving this letter out, and other people are going to read it. You think you'd try to keep that hidden. They are cowards. All the disciples hide when Jesus goes to the cross, which I would be doing the exact same thing. I don't look at it and say, oh, I would never do that. And, we probably would. Peter denies him 3 times after explicitly promising. What does he say? Though I should die with thee, yet I will not deny thee. Okay, and he's denying, I don't even know him. This is supposed to be your closest, one of your closest 3 disciples, and he's just totally denying he even knows him, which is an understandable response. We'd probably do the same thing, but I wouldn't want that recorded. Okay, I denied God. I didn't even want to say I knew him. Meanwhile, as the men are hiding for fear of the Jews, the brave women stand by Jesus and are first to discover the empty tomb. Okay, would you write that? That the men were all cowering and the women weren't afraid and they went to the tomb while you were afraid? They are doubters. Despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise from the dead, the disciples are doubtful when they hear of his resurrection. Some are even doubtful after they see him risen. Okay, would you include that? Absolutely not. We'd be like, oh, of course we believe. We had great faith. When he said it, we believed it and we weren't surprised. No, they absolutely doubted. Now think of this. If you're a New Testament writer, would you include these embarrassing details if you were making up a story? Would you write that one of your primary leaders was called Satan by Jesus, denied the Lord 3 times, hid during the crucifixion, and was later corrected on a theological issue? Of course we wouldn't put that stuff in there. Would you depict yourself as uncaring cowards and the women whose testimony wasn't even admissible in court as the brave ones who stood by Jesus and later discovered the empty tomb? I mean, think about that. Imagine you're making up a story. A woman's testimony in the first century wasn't even admissible in court. You think you would make that the first people that discovered the tomb? Absolutely not. So if you're making up a story, you can write whatever you want, right? You're not going to make the women all were brave and the women went into the tomb and the men were in fear. You're not going to make up that story. Would you admit one of you doubted the very Son of God after it had proven himself risen to all of you? Of course we wouldn't do that, right? What do you think? So just imagine, Jesus never rose. We stole his body and we're just sheerly making up a story on what happened. You wouldn't make up any of this stuff. You wouldn't want this included. Even if it was true, you'd ask them, hey, can you leave this out? Can you kind of just gloss over and maybe just not include that? You don't say we didn't, but just don't put that in there. What do you think the New Testament writers could have done if they were making up the story? They would have left out their cowardice cowardice, the rebuke, the three denials, their theological problems, and depicted themselves as bold believers who stood by Jesus through it all and who confidently marched down to the tomb on Sunday morning right through the elite Roman guard to find the risen Jesus waiting to congratulate them on their great faith. Okay, that's how you would write it, right? The men who wrote it also would say that they declared the risen Jesus to the women. The other way around, right? Yeah, well, the women were afraid. We went and we told them, and then they came out, right? Who were the ones hiding for fear of the Jews? And of course, if the story was a concoction, no disciple at any time would have been portrayed as doubting. Okay, so this is just evidence. You see all these embarrassing details that you wouldn't make up if you made up the story. In short, we don't have enough faith to believe that the New Testament writers included all those embarrassing details in a made-up story. The best explanation is what? They're telling the truth, warts and all. Okay, that whole story is really, really embarrassing to the disciples. There's nothing really, exemplary in there. The women outshone them. The women weren't afraid. They were afraid. They doubted. The women had more faith. It's usually what happens in real life. The women had more faith than the men. And you think they would make up, that would be their made-up story. Number two is the New Testament writers included embarrassing details and difficult sayings of Jesus. The New Testament writers are also honest about Jesus. Not only do they record self-incriminating details about themselves, they also record embarrassing details about their leader, Jesus, that seem to place him in a bad light. So I'll just say a few of them. Jesus is not believed by his own brothers, John 7:5. Is thought to be a deceiver, John 7:12. Is deserted by many of his followers, John 6:66. Turns off Jews who had believed in him, John 8:30-31, to the point that they want to stone him. This is stuff you're not going to put in there if you're making up or changing, altering it. He's called a drunkard in Matthew 11:19. He's called demon-possessed in Mark 3:22. He's called a madman in John 20. Has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute in Luke 7:36-39. Is crucified by the Jews and Romans, despite the fact that the Bible says, "Cursed is everyone that hangeth by a tree." So all these details you wouldn't want to include, but they included them because they wanted to be honest. This is certainly not a list of events and qualities the New Testament writers would choose if they were trying to depict Jesus as the perfect, sinless God-man. Nor are these qualities congruent with the Jewish expectation that the Messiah would come and free them from political oppression. Okay, remember, that's what the Jews wanted. They thought Jesus was coming to save them from the Romans, and then a lot of them were turned off when they found out he wasn't going to do that. In fact, according to their own Bible at the time, the Old Testament, Jesus was cursed by God for being hanged on a tree. The best explanation for these embarrassing details is that they actually occurred, and the New Testament writers are telling the truth. And what we want to do is I said it's at the beginning, the more evidence we have, the less faith we need, right? And we should have faith, but the Bible also says we should have an answer, give an answer to everyone who asks. And we shouldn't be in ignorance, and I don't want to learn this stuff because I just have faith, and I have just incredible faith. Well, when there's evidence and there's knowledge, we should know how to defend God and the Bible and give answers to people. And the more we study, the more we see just how the veracity, the truth of the Bible. And he declares the Father is greater than I. This is some more embarrassing details about Jesus that they probably wouldn't have included. Seems to predict incorrectly that he's coming back to earth within a generation. Then says about a second coming that no one knows the time, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Seems to deny his deity by asking the rich ruler, why callest thou me good? None is good, save one that is God. Luke 18:19 is seen cursing a fig tree for not having figs when it wasn't even the season for figs. Mark 6:5 seems unable to do miracles in his hometown except to heal a few sick people. Mark 6:5. So if the New Testament writers wanted to prove that Jesus was God, why'd they leave these difficult sayings that seem to argue against his deity? And moreover, Jesus makes what seems to be a complete morbid claim. In John 6:53, it says, "And Jesus said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, ye have no life in you." After this hard saying, John says, "From that time many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him." Okay, why would you include that? It's kind of an embarrassing detail. And what do we do? We have the Lord's Supper. It's a representation of Christ's body. Okay, we don't believe that it actually turns into his body like some do. But since the New Testament writers certainly would not invent these strange sayings, an unfavorable reaction, it must be authentic. Why would they're making things up. Why would you make these things up? There's no reason to. There's every reason to not include them. Well, there are reasonable explanations for these difficult sayings. It doesn't make sense the New Testament writers would leave them in if they were trying to pass off a lie as a truth. In fact, it doesn't make sense they would make up a character anything like Jesus. Okay? A weak, dying Messiah, a sacrificial lamb, is the very antithesis of man-made hero. Okay? I used to read the fantasy books, and then the hero comes and saves everybody. That's the exact opposite. That's what they were looking for, a warrior to come in and defeat the armies, but that's not what Jesus was. He was the opposite. Again, the best explanation is that the New Testament writers were not playing fast and loose with the facts, but were extremely accurate in recording exactly what Jesus said and did. Okay? So we can explain these. I'm not going to go through and explain everything that's difficult or people try to use against God, but why would they include those? When you're making up a story, you wouldn't put those in. Number 3 is the New Testament writers left in demanding sayings of Jesus. If the New Testament writers were making up a story, they certainly didn't make up a life easier for them. Jesus had some very demanding standards. Turn to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look at the Sermon on the Mount. It doesn't seem to be a human invention. That's why I like the God of the Bible, because that's not something, man doesn't make up perfect God. What does man make up? When man's making up a God, they make them just like us. Okay, you look at the Greek, the Roman gods, what were they? God of war, God of gambling, God of every vice they've got a God for, right? Because it makes them feel better. These gods do the same thing we do. That's what we make. We make gods just like us. We don't want a perfect God because it makes us what? Feel bad, okay? All right, we don't want a standard of perfection. It makes us look bad. So if you look in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, it says, "But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a man to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." I'm just going to go through some of these. Does that sound like a man would make that up? That you're wicked for your thoughts? Every man has wicked thoughts. And you think we're going to make that up and say, absolutely not. What do we like to do? We like to justify our sin. It's amazing what sins people can justify, but we're not going to make up stuff that condemns us, that makes us look bad. Okay, especially, nobody knows what I'm thinking, but it's saying here he committed adultery with her already in his heart. And that's really what you're thinking. They can convict you for planning something, even if you didn't commit it. They have these, and they plan to kill a spouse, okay, and they catch them. Did they do it? No, but they were thinking it and planning it, right? Just because they didn't get the opportunity to do it, can they still go to jail? Yes, absolutely. They were, sometimes we thoughts and we can't act on them, but Bible, it doesn't mean it's not sin, okay? Verse 32 says, "But I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his life, saving for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. Whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery." What have we done in our society? We want divorce to be easy. Okay, we want to get out of these commitments. That's what's happened in society. Matthew 5:39 says, "But I say unto you that ye resist not evil. Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. If any man will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away." Is that stuff that we would make up? I've heard a story that the the Romans had mile markers, and that the soldiers could force regular people to carry their gear 1 mile. Okay? And what is it saying here? If they can only compel you 1 mile, you're supposed to go what? 2 miles. And you think about that, then I got to walk 2 miles back, okay? Even every step I'm taking, I got to walk back. And it's not something we make up. It's not something that we turn the other cheek. That's so the opposite of human nature, of what we want to do. We want to punch them right back, right? That is our just natural human nature. It takes supernatural power to love your enemies and do this. Matthew 5:44 says, "But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust." If I'm making up something, would I make that up? Love your enemies? That's the last thing I want to do. I'm not making that up. Bless them that curse you? That's not, it goes against every fiber of our being. And revenge and get back at them, that's not something you make up, that man would make up. Do good to them that hate you. Well, I'm not doing bad, I'm just going to ignore. Do good. Actively do good to those that hate you. I mean, that's just, and you don't find that in other religions either. Western society, we think that's normal. I talked about I can't remember his name, but it's a book called Son of Hamas, and he grew up, his dad was one of the founders of Hamas, and he walked into a church in Egypt, and he heard that, and it just shocked him. Like he'd always been taught, hate your enemies, these religions of peace, that we talk about, but they don't all believe the same like the Bible, and they don't teach them love your enemies like Christianity does. That's not something any man would make up. Love your enemies, do good to them that hate thee. Matthew 5:48, "Be ye therefore perfect, even your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Man, I'm not going to make up that standard. Like, I got to be perfect. We want to lower the bar and lower the standard and compare ourselves as a husband to other husbands that do less. And, aren't you blessed? I do all this stuff. We want to compare ourselves to the lowest, not the perfect God, okay? That leaves us lacking when we compare ourselves. I mentioned bowling. I like to compare myself to somebody that's worse at bowling than me. I don't like to compare myself to somebody that bowled a 300. I fall short. I don't like that comparison. That's not something I'm going to write in there. No, Matthew 6:19 says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasure upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. Lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Okay, another thing, that's not a natural reaction. We want to get as much wealth as we can. Matthew 7:1 says, "Judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you." So we're looking at these commands. They're difficult or impossible for human beings to keep, would seem to go against natural best interests of the men who wrote them. Why would they write them? That's against our best interest to say your thoughts, your dirty thoughts are sin. We're not going to say that. They certainly are contrary to the desires of many today who want a religion of spirituality that has no moral demands. You look at man-made religions, and really they want to let everything do whatever you want, and it's okay, and they want to justify any type of behavior, and that's really man's natural reaction. Look at some of the implications of these, and I said some of them, but if thinking about sin is sinful, then everyone, including the New Testament writers, is guilty. So why am I going to write a command that I know is going to condemn me? It's not something I'm going to make up. They know they're all guilty of it. To set such stringent standards for divorce and remarriage does not appear to be in the earthly best interests of the men who recorded this saying. To not resist the insults of an evil person is to resist our basic human instincts. Okay? It also sets up an inconvenient standard of behavior for the apostles. Why? What were they undergoing at the time? Persecution, right? Okay, so they were being persecuted. So why would you write that down? Love those that are persecuting you. That's not, while you're being persecuted. That's not something that, most people would make up. Pray for our enemies goes well beyond any ethic ever uttered and commands kindness where hate is natural. Okay, no other religion that I know of has that. To not accumulate, and this is talking on a personal level, okay? It's not talking on a government level, and we just love every, terrible government, and, I have to say that. Like, this is people want to, I'll just get off here. I think God's blessing us, going to bless us because of what? What does he say? He will bless those that bless Israel, curse those that curse Israel, and I think we're seeing that on the stage. We saw that last night. I'm glad our president is standing up for Israel, and I think we're going to get blessings from that. And but that's talking on a this is a personal level, not a government level. We're not. People say, "Oh, love your enemies." We shouldn't have capital punishment for that. I'm like, no, that's the government's job. Okay, not our job. We're supposed to love them. It's not the government's job to love mass murderers and all the bad people. Their job is for justice, right? Take care of that. But so just on a personal level here, not accumulate financial wealth contradicts our deepest desires for security. Okay, as a man, I want to have security for my family and myself, and that's just a natural desire. To be perfect is unattainable request for fallible human beings. Okay, I'm not going to write a book and say you need to be perfect when I know I fall short. Okay, I want a book that justifies everything I'm doing and tells me I'm good, whatever I'm doing, right? To not judge unless our lives are in order counters our natural tendencies to point out faults in others. Okay. And these commands clearly are not the commands that people would impose on themselves. Who can live up to such standards? Only a perfect person, and perhaps that's the point. Okay, it was written by Jesus, God, a perfect person. This is not something men would make up. Number 4 is the New Testament writers carefully distinguish Jesus' words from their own. So even though quotation marks, they didn't have them in the first century Greek, the New Testament writers distinguished Jesus' words very clearly. If you have a red letter edition, and even if you have different versions, which we don't have a bunch of different versions, but they all will be red lettered the same because it's clear, they clearly distinguished who said it, whether it was Jesus or somebody else. And so we know what he said and what he didn't say. Why do we cite this as evidence of trustworthiness? Because it would have been very easy for the New Testament writers to solve first century theological disputes by putting words into Jesus' mouth. Okay? You're writing something, and maybe you're writing somebody's will, or I could just add this or change this, or, nobody will know. Okay? After all, if you are making up the Christianity story and trying to pass it off as truth, wouldn't you simply make up more quotes from Jesus to convince stubborn people to see things your way? Okay, like some things are unclear. You're like, I wish they would have said more, or been more clear, A lot of times it's not the stuff that we don't get, it's the stuff that is very clear that we struggle with, We get off in the weeds, but God's very clear about that stuff, and that's the stuff we struggle with. Think how convenient it would have been for them to end all debate on the controversial issues such as circumcision, obeying the laws of Moses, speaking in tongues, and so forth by merely making up quotes from Jesus. Okay, they could have said, well, I heard him say this, and add that to it. I think God's very clear on some of these things, though. I think people try to find what they want to find. Despite unending frustration with some early believers, the New Testament writers never do that. Instead of pulling rank in this way, the New Testament writers seem to stay true to what Jesus said and didn't say. Look at Paul. He wrote nearly half the New Testament books and dealt with most of the controversial problems of the church. He never pulls rank. He quotes Jesus just a few times, and on one of those occasions, he goes out of his way to explicitly distinguish his words from Jesus' words. I'll read it, 1 Corinthians 7:10. I'm almost done. It says, and unto the married I command ye not, but I the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband, but if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Let not the husband put away his wife. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. What is he saying? These are my words, not Jesus. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. So why would Paul be so careful if he were not telling the truth? again, the best explanation for the accuracy of the New Testament writers is that they were telling the truth. Okay, so we're just looking at 10 reasons how we know the Bible is accurate, how we know they didn't embellish, and for a number of reasons here. And we got some more we'll go over next week. All right, let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for we have your word, dear Lord, that we can trust in its accuracy. We thank you for all that you do in Jesus' name. Amen.